Udain. In the 3rd year of Jehoiakim's reign, a dark omen loomed over Jerusalem. From the distance, the echo of war drums announced the arrival of a relentless enemy. Babylon, under the command of King Nebuchadnezzar, was approaching with a fearsome army. Terrified citizens watched from the walls as a cloud of dust covered the horizon, a sign of imminent destruction. The city, once a symbol of strength and devotion, now trembled before the advance of the most powerful empire of the age. Babylonian soldiers surrounded Jerusalem with calculated precision. Every exit was blocked, every attempt at resistance stifled before it began. Within the walls, King Jehoiakim knew there was no escape. His advisors debated desperately, but the city's fate was already written. The people clung to hope, but the days passed and the enemy's pressure became unbearable. Hunger began to consume the inhabitants' strength, and surrender became the only option. When the gates finally gave way, a roar of victory resounded among the invaders. Babylon entered the sacred city with devastating force. The looting began. Immediately, Solomon's temple, the pride of Israel, was mercilessly violated. Sacred treasures were ripped from their places, and gold and silver disappeared into foreign hands. The priests, powerless, watched as God's dwelling place was desecrated. The pain on their faces reflected the tragedy that marked a before and after in the history of their people. But Babylon was not just seeking riches. Nebuchadnezzar knew that true conquest was not only about land, but also about minds and hearts. Therefore, from among the prisoners, he ordered the wisest, strongest, and most promising of Judah's nobility to be selected. Young men who, in time, would be molded to serve the empire. Among them was Daniel, a young man of royal lineage, known for his intelligence and devotion to God. As he was chained and dragged into exile, his mind was not on his own fate, but on what that moment meant for his people. The road to Babylon was long and humiliating. The prisoners marched under the scorching sun without water or rest, their faces covered in dust and despair. Left behind were their homes, their families, and their identity. Now they were slaves in a foreign land, subject to a king who demanded absolute loyalty. But although Babylon could take their bodies, their souls still belonged to God. Daniel, along with other young men of Judah, was taken to the heart of the empire, to a place where their faith would be tested like never before. As they passed through the majestic gates of Babylon, surrounded by golden reliefs and high walls that spoke of the greatness of the kingdom, one thought remained steadfast in their hearts. Their God had not abandoned them, and although the future was uncertain, he was determined to remain faithful no matter the cost. 2. Understood. Here is the next part of the route. When Daniel and his friends arrived in Babylon, they found themselves in a completely different world. The majestic hanging gardens, the enormous temples, and the imposing figure of King Nebuchadnezzar dominated the city. But the most shocking thing wasn't the architecture. It was the plan the king had for them. Nebuchadnezzar didn't just want captives, he wanted minds molded in his image. So he ordered that the wisest and strongest young men of Israel be educated in Babylonian culture. They wanted to turn them into Babylonians, destroy their identity, their faith, and their roots. As part of this transformation, their names were changed. Daniel, whose name meant God is my judge, was renamed Belteshazzar, a name that honored pagan gods. Hananiah became Shadrach, Mishael became Meshach, and Azariah became Abednego. It wasn't a simple name change. It was an attempt to erase their connection to the God of Israel. Imagine for a moment what this meant. From childhood, Daniel and his friends were taught to serve God, to follow his law, and to live with integrity. Now they were in a place where everything they knew was being ripped away from them, but there was something the Babylonians didn't understand. They could change their names, They could force them to learn a new culture, but they could never change what was in their hearts. Because in the midst of an empire that wanted to control everything, Daniel and his friends made a decision that would change their destiny forever. 3. Got it. Here's the development of the high-impact segment with retention strategies. From the first day in Babylon, Daniel and his friends faced a test that would put their loyalty to God to the test. In Nebuchadnezzar's grand palace, surrounded by luxury and abundance, they were offered the finest food in the kingdom, exotic meats, fine wines, and delicacies prepared for the king himself. For anyone, this would be a unique opportunity, but Daniel saw something deeper. He knew that accepting that food meant more than just feeding themselves. It meant adopting the customs and beliefs of Babylon, gradually surrendering to the culture that was trying to erase their identity. But how could they defy the king without provoking his wrath? With wisdom and courage, Daniel proposed an alternative to the chief eunuch. For 10 days, he and his friends would eat only vegetables and drink water. Nothing else. If after that time their appearance was inferior to that of the other young men, they would accept whatever was offered. It was a risky challenge. The king's food was synonymous with strength and vitality, while such a simple diet could weaken anyone. But Daniel trusted that God would honor his decision. The days passed. While the other young men gorged themselves on banquets, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah remained steadfast in their commitment. At the end of the trial period, something astonishing happened. Not only were they healthy, but their appearance surpassed that of all the others. Their faces reflected vigor, clarity, and a strength that came not from food, but from their obedience to God. The impact was immediate. The authority overseeing their diet could not ignore the evidence. Daniel and his friends showed that their faith was not an obstacle, but a source of true strength. Without the need for grand speeches or rebellions, they had overcome the first great test in Babylon. But this was only the first battle. What would come next would put their faith in jeopardy like never before. 4. In the middle of the night, King Nebuchadnezzar woke with a start. His heart pounded. He had just had a dream. But it wasn't just any dream. Something inside him told him that this message wasn't just a product of his mind, but a revelation with a hidden meaning. Intrigued and disturbed, the monarch summoned all the wise men, astrologers, and magicians of the kingdom. He demanded not only an interpretation of the dream, but also that it be revealed without him telling anyone. How could such a request be possible? His advisors tried to reason with him. No one on earth can do what you ask, O king. But Nebuchadnezzar, furious, decreed the death of all the wise men of Babylon. Among those condemned was Daniel. But instead of despairing, he sought God. Together with his friends, he prayed fervently, asking the Lord to reveal the mystery. That same night, in a vision, God showed him the dream and its meaning. The next morning, Daniel was brought before the king. Without fear, without hesitation, he declared, "O king, your dream cannot be revealed to the wise, but there is a God in the heavens who reveals mysteries." And then he began to describe the vision with astonishing precision. The king had seen a gigantic statue with a head of gold, chest and arms of silver, belly of bronze, legs of iron, and feet of iron mixed with clay. But the most shocking thing came next. Out of nowhere, a stone, loosed without human intervention, struck the statue's feet, completely destroying it. Daniel explained its meaning. The statue represented the great empires of humanity. Nebuchadnezzar was the head of gold, but after him would come other kingdoms, each weaker than the last. And in the end, when the world was divided, God would establish an eternal kingdom represented by the stone that would never be destroyed. The impact was immediate. Nebuchadnezzar, the most powerful king of his time, was speechless. He bowed down before Daniel and acknowledged him as a man favored by the true God. For the first time in his life, the Babylonian monarch saw that his power was not absolute, that his kingdom would not last forever. Thanks to his faithfulness, Daniel not only saved his life and the lives of his friends, but also became the most influential man in the kingdom. But this victory was only the beginning of even greater trials. 5. In the middle of the vast plain of Dura, an imposing golden statue stood, reflecting the splendor of the sun. Its creator, King Nebuchadnezzar, had given an unbreakable order. The entire kingdom was to bow down and worship his image when the music was played. No one could disobey, no one could defy his will, or they would suffer the most terrible consequences. But among the crowd, 3 men remained standing. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, did not bend their knees. The king's decrees, the fury of the rulers, or even imminent death mattered nothing. They bowed before one God. The news reached Nebuchadnezzar, and his face was contorted with anger. No one could defy him like that. Furious, he had the 3 Hebrews brought in and gave them one last chance. If you do not bow down, you will be thrown into the blazing fiery furnace, and no God will be able to deliver you from my hand. Without hesitation, the young men responded, "We need not defend ourselves. Our God can deliver us from the fire, but if he does not, we will still not serve your gods." Silence fell over the place. Nebuchadnezzar was beside himself. He ordered the furnace to be heated 7 times hotter than normal, and the men to be bound and thrown into the fire. The heat was so intense that the flames consumed the soldiers who pushed them inside. The king watched from his throne, but something strange happened. His eyes widened, his face went from anger to disbelief, and then to utter astonishment. He bolted upright and exclaimed, "Didn't we throw 3 bound men into the fire?" The advisors nodded in confusion. "Then look," Nebuchadnezzar shouted, "I see 4 unbound men walking in the fire, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods." The monarch trembled. The fire hadn't done the young men the slightest harm, nor did their clothes smell of smoke, and the 4th being was undeniable proof that his power was not absolute. Trembling, Nebuchadnezzar approached the furnace and shouted, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out." The 3 men emerged unharmed. God had protected them from the impossible. At that moment, the king, who had previously boasted of his power, fell to his knees and decreed that no one should speak against the God of Israel, for no one else could save in that way. That day, the fire that was to destroy them became irrefutable, a proof of God's power, and the 3 young Hebrews not only survived, but were promoted in Babylon. But their story would not end there. The best was yet to come. 6. The great Nebuchadnezzar walked through the halls of his majestic palace in Babylon. From the heights of his tower, he looked down upon the city he himself had built. Impenetrable walls, dazzling temples, hanging gardens that defied nature. With a smug smile, he raised his arms and proclaimed, "Is this not the great Babylon that I have built with my power and for the glory of my majesty?" But what the king didn't know was that his words sealed his fate. A year earlier, Daniel had warned him, "O king, put away your sin and humble yourself before God, for if you do not, you will become like a beast of the field and live far from men." But Nebuchadnezzar, confident in his greatness, ignored the warning. And at that very moment, while pride filled his heart, a voice from heaven thundered over him, "The kingdom has been taken from you. You will be separated from men and will live with the beasts of the field, eating grass like oxen. And so it will be until you acknowledge that the Most High rules over the kingdoms of men." The mighty Nebuchadnezzar collapsed to the ground. His mind clouded, his thoughts became confused, his reason disappeared. The great king of Babylon became like an animal. He was cast out of his palace. He lived in the fields. His hair grew like eagle feathers, his nails like bird talons. He devoured grass, slept in the rain, and his roars mingled with the howl of wolves. Babylon forgot its monarch. His glory had vanished like dust, but God was not finished with him. After 7 years of humiliation, in the midst of his madness, Nebuchadnezzar raised his eyes to heaven, and in that instant his reason returned. His pride crumbled, and he understood what he had once rejected, that there is only one sovereign God who gives and takes power according to his will. Prostrate on the ground, with tears in his eyes, he proclaimed, "Now I recognize that the Most High reigns forever. No man can resist his will. He humbles the proud and exalts whom he wills." That same day, Nebuchadnezzar was restored. His kingdom was returned to him, his greatness multiplied. But this time, he did not boast about his power, but exalted the God of heaven. Babylon saw the rise of a proud king, his fall into madness, and his restoration through humility. Its history was written so that all generations would understand that the glory of men is fleeting, but the kingdom of God is eternal. 7. The great hall of the palace of Babylon overflowed with opulence. Gold and silver cups glittered in the light from the candelabras. King Belshazzar, surrounded by nobles and concubines, raised his cup in an act of defiance. He had ordered the sacred vessels brought from the temple in Jerusalem to be used at his banquet. It was a direct mockery of the God of Israel. Laughter and bustle filled the room when suddenly the atmosphere changed. A hand appeared on the wall. There was no body, no face, just a hand illuminated by a supernatural light. Its fingers began to write words in an unknown language. Silence was instantaneous. The musicians dropped their instruments. Belshazzar's face paled, his hands trembled, his knees knocked together. For the first time in his life, the king experienced a terror that all his wealth and power could not dispel. Desperate, he cried out for the wise men of Babylon. Astrologers, magicians, diviners, all were called in to interpret the message, but none could decipher it. It was then that the Queen Mother remembered a man, a Hebrew, a prophet. "Your Majesty, in your kingdom there is a man in whom the spirit of the gods dwells. His name is Daniel." Daniel was brought before the king. Calmly, he looked at the inscription on the wall. "O king, these words are a sentence." And, in a firm voice, he revealed their meaning. "Mene, mene, tekel, upharsin. Your kingdom has been numbered and put to an end. You have been weighed in the balances and found wanting. Your kingdom will be given to the Medes and Persians." The words fell like a death sentence. Belshazzar, in his arrogance, wanted to honor Daniel by dressing him in purple and gold. But the prophet knew the truth. There would be no tomorrow for Babylon. That same night, the Persians entered the city. No battle, no resistance. The great Babylonian empire fell in an instant, and Belshazzar, the king who defied God, was executed. 8. The news spread throughout the kingdom. Daniel had been promoted to the highest position in Babylon under the new king Darius. His wisdom and impeccable character made him the monarch's trusted man. But his promotion aroused the envy of the princes and governors. Daniel's enemies gathered secretly. They needed a trap. They looked for some fault in his administration, but found nothing. Then they discovered his greatest strength, his faith in God. The only way to trap him is with his own religion, they said. Cunningly, they convinced Darius to sign an irrevocable decree. For 30 days, no one could pray to any god or man except the king. Whoever disobeyed would be thrown into the lion's den. Daniel heard the decree and didn't hesitate. He went up to his room, opened the windows toward Jerusalem, and as always, prayed to God 3 times a day. His enemies were waiting for him. They ran to denounce him to the king, and Darius, realizing the trap, was distressed. He tried to save Daniel, but the laws of the Medes and Persians could not be revoked. As night fell, Daniel was taken to the den. "May your God, whom you serve faithfully, deliver you," Darius said sadly. The enormous stones were rolled across the entrance. Inside, the wild beasts roared. The king spent a sleepless night, without food, without entertainment. At the first light of dawn, he ran to the den and cried out in despair, "Daniel, servant of the living God, was your God able to deliver you from the lions?" There was silence. The wind blew between the rocks. And then a firm, calm voice emerged from the abyss. "O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths. They have not harmed me, for I was found innocent before him and before you." The guards rolled away the stone. Daniel emerged unharmed, not a single scratch on his body. The miracle was evident. Furious, the king ordered that the men who accused Daniel be thrown into the den, and before they touched the ground, the lions tore them to pieces. That same morning, Darius issued an edict. "Fear and reverence the God of Daniel, for he is the living God. His kingdom will never be destroyed, and his power is eternal." Daniel not only survived, but triumphed, and God was glorified throughout the earth. 9. The night was fraught with mystery. Daniel, now an old man, was transported in a terrifying vision. In front of him, 4 monstrous beasts emerged from the churning sea. Each represented more than just creatures. They were symbols of powerful kingdoms that would dominate world history. The first, a lion with eagle wings, majestic and dominant, but whose wings had been torn off. Then a ferocious bear, holding 3 ribs in its teeth, a symbol of brutal conquests. Then a leopard with 4 heads and wings, moving with unstoppable speed. And finally, the most terrifying of all, an indescribable beast with iron teeth and 10 horns. Daniel watched in amazement. From among the horns emerged a small one, but with human eyes and an arrogant mouth. It spoke blasphemous words, defying the Most High. But then the heavens opened. Daniel saw something even grander, a throne of fire and the Ancient of Days, God himself, sitting in judgment. Millions served him, and at that moment, the little horn was destroyed. And then a glorious figure appeared in the clouds. It was the Son of Man. He was given dominion, glory, and an eternal kingdom. All peoples and nations would serve him, and his dominion would never end. Daniel was baffled. He knew this vision was beyond his time. He asked an angel the meaning, and the answer shook him. The beasts are kingdoms that will rule the earth, but in the end, the kingdom will be given to the saints of the Most High. Daniel trembled. What he saw was not just a dream, but a revelation of the end times. His heart was troubled, but one thing was clear. God is in control of history, and his kingdom will triumph over all others. The night was fraught with mystery. Daniel, now an old man, was transported in a terrifying vision. In front of him, 4 monstrous beasts emerged from the churning sea. Each represented more than just creatures. They were symbols of powerful kingdoms that would dominate world history. The first, a lion with eagle wings, majestic and dominant, but whose wings had been torn off. Then a ferocious bear, holding 3 ribs in its teeth, a symbol of brutal conquests. Next, a leopard with 4 heads and wings, moving with unstoppable swiftness. And finally, the most terrifying of all, an indescribable beast with iron teeth and 10 horns. Daniel watched in awe. From between the horns emerged a small one, but with human eyes and a haughty mouth. He spoke with blasphemy, defying the Most High. But then the heavens opened. Daniel saw something even grander, a throne of fire and the Ancient of Days, God himself sitting in judgment. Millions served him, and at that moment the little horn was destroyed. And then a glorious figure appeared in the clouds. It was the Son of Man. He was given dominion, glory, and an eternal kingdom. All peoples and nations would serve him, and his dominion would never end. Daniel was baffled. He knew this vision was beyond his time. He asked an angel the meaning, and the answer shook him. The beasts are kingdoms that will rule the earth, but in the end, the kingdom will be given to the saints of the Most High. Daniel trembled. What he saw was not just a dream, but a revelation of the end times. His heart was troubled, but one thing was clear. God is in control of history, and his kingdom will triumph over all others. 10. Daniel fell prostrate in prayer. His heart burned for Jerusalem, the holy city that lay in ruins. The years of exile in Babylon had passed, but restoration had not yet arrived. With tears in his eyes, he lifted his voice to heaven and cried out for mercy. Lord, we have sinned. We have turned away from your commandments, but now we beg you, do not delay your promise any longer. Restore your people and your holy city. As he prayed, something astonishing happened. Suddenly, a radiant figure appeared before him. It was Gabriel, God's angel messenger. His voice rang out with authority and compassion. Daniel, I have come to give you understanding. And then he revealed a heavenly mystery. 70 weeks have been decreed upon your people and upon the holy city. At that time, transgression will be finished, sin atoned for, and everlasting righteousness will be established. Daniel listened with his soul in suspense. Gabriel was speaking of something far greater than simply rebuilding Jerusalem. From the decree to restore the city, 7 weeks and 62 weeks would pass until the arrival of the Anointed One. The Messiah would come. But then, the prophecy took a dark turn. The Anointed One will be cut off and have nothing. The Messiah would be rejected. He would be sacrificed. Then Gabriel spoke of an even more distant future. A ruler would come and destroy the city and the sanctuary. There would be war and desolation until the end. But in the end, all would be consummated. The last enemy would be defeated, and God's justice would be established forever. Daniel gasped. He had cried out for the restoration of Jerusalem, but God had shown him the fate of the entire world. The prophecy of the 70 weeks was not just about his people, but about the Messiah who would bring salvation and the final judgment that would end human history. Daniel closed his eyes. The weight of the revelation was immense, but in his heart, a certainty burned brightly. God had a perfect plan, and his eternal kingdom would come.